Welcome to the Digital Velocity Podcast, a podcast covering the intersection between strategy, digital marketing, and emerging trends impacting each of us. In each episode, we interview industry veterans to dive into the best hard-hitting analysis of industry news and critical topics facing brand executives. Now, here are your hosts, Tim Curtis and Erik Martinez.
Welcome to today's episode of the Digital Velocity Podcast. I'm Erik Martinez from Blue Tangerine.
And I'm Tim Curtis from Cohere One.
Today, we have Jody Grunden on the show, who founded Summit CPA Group in 2002, which is a leading provider of virtual CFO services in North America. In 2014, the company went fully remote. We're going to spend some time talking about that today. Jody, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Erik and Tim, for having me on.
Good to have you.
So, Jody, before we totally dive in and talk about remote work and virtual CFO services, if you don't mind, just give us a brief synopsis of your journey and how you got here.
Oh, geez, that's a whole day's worth of talking here. I'll make it short, though. I started Summit in 2002 as a traditional accounting firm. So that's what we did. We did accounting, tax, that kind of stuff. 2004 is when we made the switch to virtual CFO services. It was something brand new. Nobody was doing it. At least they weren't marketing it on the web. It was one of those new concepts. And we wanted to really kind of help people go from here's where they're at to here's where they need to go. So really kind of looking forward thinking conversations, meeting with clients on a regular weekly basis, really kind of just changing the way that people think about accounting. And that was kind of the goal from day one, just kind of being a disruptor, right? We went ahead and created this concept. We created a subscription-based billing model along with it. We thought, hey, let's really kind of break the mold. Instead of charging hourly like most accounting firms do it and have done for a long time, we were just going to create a subscription model. It was widely successful. And I'd be lying to say it took off like really quick. It was one of those things that took off like over a period of 5 to 6 years. I thought we were going to go bankrupt in the process because nobody understood subscription-based. Nobody understood virtual CFO. We had to educate clients and really educate prospective clients out there. As it started growing and niching, we started niching our service into creative agencies. We're working primarily with web design, web development, SEO, media companies, you name it. We are working with those folks. We started seeing really a growth in our service level. Those folks understood a lot better than the doctors and the lawyers out there, that type of thing. And it really kind of hit speed. And then we thought we'd throw the other curveball in which we were going to go fully remote. I had a first client that was a CFO client in the creative agency space, was 100% remote, started that way. They're a 65-person dev shop out of Rhode Island, and they called and said, hey, do you think we could help us out on the CFO side? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So we helped them out. And in the same process, we figured out what worked and didn't work for them as a fully remote team. And then in 2013, I introduced that concept to our team and said, hey, we're going to go fully remote. And at that time, we had 18 people on the team. We were really rocking it here. We had everybody in the same building, the building that I owned, actually. And I sat in front of everybody and said, hey, we're going to go fully remote. They thought that I was joking. It was like dead silent. And it was like, no, we can't do this. What are you talking about? Go fully remote. I heard every excuse in the book. It's like, oh, we can't collaborate. We got great culture. What's going to happen to that? People aren't going to take us seriously. All the different things that you heard pre-pandemic, I heard like in 2013, like hit me right in the face. And I thought, well, I can't lose the entire team. And so I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'll spend $100,000. We're going to remodel the offices. And we're going to make it really cool so that they have a cool place to actually work in now that we're going to stay at brick and mortar. And so I did all the construction, built this really cool fish tank in there, put some exotic fish in. It looked really neat. All the offices had TVs in it. I have no idea, so I can read stocks. And I did anyways. About 6 weeks into it, the construction kept getting delayed. I had to kick everybody out of the office in that time frame because they were literally taking walls out. And there's no way they could work in there. So it was just me in that office guiding the construction crew. One by one, just about all 18 people came to me and said, you know what, this remote stuff's kind of cool. Do you mind if I do that? I'm like, well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I never actually got to the point where I put the signage up. It was like, fine, we're going to go fully remote here. It was all like 3 or 4 that didn't have internet. They hung out in the office for me it didn't last very long either, about 6 weeks, maybe another 6 weeks, maybe a couple months. And then they decided to go remote. And I thought, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. I'm going to take the life preserver and toss it out. And we're going to hire now fully across the United States. It worked out really well to our advantage. At the same time, Forbes recognized this as one of the first 100 firms to go fully remote. And all of a sudden, the recruiting thing, it was no problem at all. We had like 2,000 resumes in about about a day and a half of all these really great people that wanted to, try this remote thing out, a new concept, new idea. And it was just so much so about locked my computer up as many resumes that I got. It was like literally pinging my inbox in front of everybody. It's like everybody's like, new resume, new resume, new resume. And my employees are like, should I be worried? I'm like, no, I have no idea how to turn this thing off. That's kind of the circle thing. And then, oh, geez, we had 35% plus growth every year since 2010. And we basically doubled our size every 3 years. And we grew to about 10 million. And that's when Anders, an accounting firm out of St. Louis, Missouri, took a look at us and said, hey, we'd love for you to join us and become our virtual CFO arm. We want you to stay remote. We want you to do everything that you're doing now. Don't change anything. Instead of, doubling your size every, 3 years, let's say if we can triple your size every 3 years. Let's say if we can get you from a $10 million firm is what we were back in April of last year to a $50 million firm within the next 3 or 4 years. And I thought, that's exciting. That's something I could definitely do. And so I made the entrepreneurial mistake of, not a mistake, but at the time, entrepreneurs would definitely say it was a mistake. Sold my business, joined in with a larger accounting firm, became an equity partner in that firm. And now I lead the virtual CFO division in that firm. Again, our team is kind of hybrid now, right? We went fully remote back to hybrid, where we've got 300 and some people that are working in the St. Louis office. And then we've got the 70-ish to 90 people that are working fully remote.
That's really interesting because that's got to be a little bit of a culture clash in terms of, hey, you got part of your team working fully remote, you got some of the people in office. Everybody's like experimenting with some form of hybrid work, right? Trying to balance the office culture versus, quite frankly, we get a lot of productivity when our employees are working fully remote. We went through this transition. I actually started fully remote as a single person and started building a team. Then we had a small office, but we always have been able to work fully remote because of tools like back in the day, I was using Skype. I needed Skype and an internet connection. And today I just need an internet connection, right? Jody, as you look at the fact that you guys went fully remote, now you're part of another organization that's kind of hybrid. What are the 3 keys of running that type of organization? How did that play out? What are the challenges that you see? I feel very strongly that our retail clients are really struggling with this idea, that they feel like they have to have somebody sitting in a cubicle or just down the hall so that they're always at their beck and call. I've found in 13 years of doing this, I don't really have a problem reaching my team. It's extremely rare for me to have a challenge reaching my team or being able to connect with them or even build culture. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I would say the biggest thing is trust, really, when it comes down to it. You've got to really trust your team. You got to build a team that trusts each other because, again, you're going to be in a different location. So as a remote worker, I might be in Massachusetts today. Tomorrow I might be in Florida. And the next day I might be in Tennessee. Who knows where I'm at? And it really makes no difference. But the trust factor is super important. So to kind of back up in the accounting world, because I relate to that a little bit more, is that it's typically by the hour. You work by the hour. You're working along teammates. They're asking questions back and forth. There's a lot of collaboration going on. It strictly comes down to the hour. And when you work remote, it kind of shifts away from the hour and it becomes the task. So instead of the hour, it's like, hey, this project's due by Friday at 2:00 so that we can review it and meet with the client at 5:00. I don't care when they get stuff done, but I need that done at that time and I need to hit their deadlines. So working remote changes. If they work 3 hours in the morning, they take 2 hours break because they have a PTO with their kids or whatever, and they're hanging out with them, and then they come back and finish it off. I don't care. Why would I care? That's the flexibility of remote. But what I do care is I want to make sure they get it done timely and there's no excuses for that at that point. It's a mind shift, really. It's a mind shift around trust. I don't need to see people in an office to know that they're getting the job done. I would argue that our team is a lot more productive than any brick and mortar team where people are sitting side by side, chit-chatting all day, having all those water cooler talks, maybe stretching things out because they just have to be there. There's a lot of that game that goes on in the brick and mortar that our team, I just don't feel that has that issue.
It's interesting when you're talking about models that people often will cite won't work. Accounting is oftentimes one of those areas where they identify that's not the model where this will work. And it's interesting that you, in being one of those 100 pioneering firms, as virtual CFO services, that's exactly what you were, and that's exactly what you did. And I think it underscores what I say is the need for a little bit of a different mentality and it's sort of a restart. One of the things that you kind of identified in some of your background information was three things, which I thought were really core. It was managing employees, because that's a different process. It looks different.
Yep.
The requirements for that, whether that's a QC process, whether that's just traditional managing them day to day, training, et cetera, but also implementing technology and building a solid culture. Those are the other two elements that are just so critical, whether that's a hybrid work environment or a fully remote work environment. It's interesting that we will stick people in an office environment and expect, in some respects, some of these elements to come together on their own. It's just ironic to me that as a virtual CFO services, again, the type of work that just can't be done remotely, you've made that work. That just underscores why we've got to think differently about this issue.
It's a huge change. Well, people just love change, right? I mean, so much so that they're changing all the time.
Exactly.
Obviously, that's, facetious. They don't like change at all. And that's what holds people back. So they make excuses why things aren't going to work. It's not going to work. And then they justify it by hearing a story about how it didn't work. Well, did they really know the full backstory there? They don't. With us, when we decided to go remote, I knew, one, we could provide the service level remote to people because we've been doing it for years, before that, but we just weren't remote ourselves. And it was kind of silly how we can say, yeah, we're going to be your virtual CFO. And, you're going to be in Texas. I'm going to be in Florida. My coworker is going to be in Massachusetts, but you know what? We can't work remotely together. I mean, the concept didn't make sense to me. So when we made that switch, again, I had some brilliant people that were already doing it. And they too said, oh, there's no way. My partner was that way. Now, Adam, my business partner for, now 20 plus years, he's like, there is absolutely no way that I can work remote. I've got kids, every reason in the book. And then once he actually did it, boom, he figured it out. So I think it's just simply opening up your mind to do it. I will tell you the three things that you pointed out there. You have to be deliberate on all of those things. It just doesn't magically happen, like you mentioned, where you magically put somebody in a cubicle and all of a sudden they're going to be great. You got to be deliberate with everything. You got to be deliberate with your people, and you've got to be deliberate with the technology. For a lot of folks that went remote, they're kind of thrust into it during the pandemic. They didn't adapt quick enough. They didn't find that technology that allowed them to do it. They just kept doing what they're doing normally and hoping that they got through it. Whereas they should have been really kind of looking, hey, what's the best way of working remote now? What kind of technologies out there that we can collaborate better with? Is it over Zoom? Is it Teams? Is it a product called Sococo, which kind of gives you the Sim City look? What's going to work for our team to give them the feeling of being remote and being on a team? That's hugely important. And then with culture, our culture is solid. It's way up there. And if you compare us to any kind of service-based business, we're in the top 80% in culture. And that's brick and mortar, that's everybody. Accounting firms way up there. And I would say that's because we're super deliberate on everything, deliberate through the communication. We communicate in the same way with everybody. That's important. We've got it set up where people feel part of a team. We do things like the team retreats. We have those every 6 months. And then we've got excuses for people to meet up individually if they need to for various things. That touch and feel is super important. We do those things. And those are all part of the culture and part of being as that unit. So I strongly believe that any service-based business can make that switch. It's a mentality issue. And I don't care if you're a 50-person shop or a 10,000-person shop, it makes no difference to me. As long as you put the game plan in place, the culture, the people, get everything in alignment, it'll work.
It will. There's so many things you can do to move your strategy along. As you were alluding to there offline ahead of the show, one of the things we were chatting about was the fact that these last two conferences in the last, 2.5 weeks or whatever, the number one question among the executive C-suite was this work remote, in-house, et cetera. And, and I sat there in a couple different sessions and really listened to different individuals share. I was in more of just an active listening mode. Wasn't really sharing a whole lot. I was interested in really hearing kind of what people were saying. And, and as service providers, of course, both Erik and I are as well, and from an agency perspective, really what we're talking about is just a slight modification or slight twist on a challenge that we run into quite frequently. And that is also this concept of if things are in-house, they're better. If things are in-house, I control them better. I have more leverage. What we have found over the years is that framework that guided business for so long is very seriously antiquated. What we're looking at now is it's not really a matter of in-house versus outsourcing in the case of an agency. It's really about the aspect of control, what that looks like. Do you really have more control? When you're in a totally in-office environment, you are dealing far more with stagnation than you are when you're dealing with, in some of these instances where people are having a more collaborative online. It's forcing people to do things a little bit differently. I was really struck by the parallels between those. And Eric and I can just go story after story after story of clients who maintained that we're going to put everything in house, and they were blind to the slow decline of innovation and the slow decline of their own business. Now we're talking about a slight variation of that, which is, that hybrid. And in the case of your services, outsourcing. When we're talking about this whole in-office hybrid or fully remote, we really have to take one step back and again, drill down to those larger three issues, which is, where are we going from a management perspective? What technology is going to get us there? And then culturally, how do we invest to make that culture? We do that. When we went fully virtual, we started having in-service meetings where we all got together. Now, for us, that was our teams. Since we were in San Francisco area, we would go to Sonoma. We would do tours in Sonoma together, and really was just 2 days tacked to the end of meetings and social. We do Christmas in Vegas every year. We just do a lot of really, really fun things. We have fun things that we do during the week. We do virtually fun things. Those are critical. Those are the kind of investment. But man, that doesn't look like anything anyone has ever done before. You just have to have a different mindset.
Oh yeah, 100%. I 100% believe that if you're going to go remote, you've got to have the team retreats like you're talking about. I mean, that is a game changer, and you will find people will get disconnected quickly if you don't do that. I can just basically go back before pandemic. Our retention rate for our employees is in the 90%. We had very small churn. If you compare that to other CPA firms, that's pretty good. We're pretty happy with it. We even have that high retention with a fast growing company, which again is really tough to do. When the pandemic hit, it just happened to hit March there, and our next team retreat, again, every 6 months, next team retreat was in May. So people were looking forward to going to that team retreat, and it got bubbled up, bubbled back. And finally we're like, we got to cancel it. We can't have our team retreat. So it was about a year after that before we actually could meet again. It's kind of funny, but just about every person that we hired within the 4 months before that team retreat, during that 1 year period, they're not here anymore. They lost the connectivity. They never had that bonding experience. Folks that were here before the team retreat, they were still here. We didn't hardly lose any of those folks. The 12 or so people that we hired during that period of time, gone. I strongly believe that was it. Once we went back to the team retreat, since then, our turnover's been back down to the 10%-ish, mark. And there's really not a whole lot other that we did differently. We changed the pay structure a little bit, but I can't imagine that would be it. I think it's the connectivity that they just didn't have during that time. I tell people, that's a must. If you're going to do the remote thing, that's not even a negotiable item. That's a must. Like you had mentioned, don't make these retreats all workshoppy where all they're hearing all this technical stuff over and over and again, because they're not going to want to be there. You can have some technical stuff in there, which is perfectly fine, but make it soft skill stuff. Hey, let's look at DISC, or let's look at EQI, or let's look at the working genius model and apply it to our team, or bring a speaker in that's going to talk about purpose, or, whatever that might be, but make it so that they really enjoy going to it. But more importantly, make it so that once that retreat is done during the day, that they have time to just hang out with everybody. We do scheduled dinners where we mix people up. There might be dinners of 8. We pay for them to go out for dinner and all that kind of stuff. And so they're forced to talk to people that they've never met before. They've had no reason to meet before, because when you're in a remote environment, you're only as big as the number of people you meet with, right? So I can be an 80-person firm, but if I only talk to 3 people, guess what? I'm a 3-person firm, because that's all that they know. But when you go to these retreats and you're forced to mix and mingle with people you don't know, now you're a 15-person firm or a 10-person firm. The next retreat you go to, now you're a 20-person firm. It's amazing what those retreats do. And after they go out for dinner, we always have something that they can come back to. Maybe we'll rent out a penthouse, we'll have a bartender there, and then it'll be an open bar until like 11 o'clock or whatever. So they, again, have a place to socialize, come back, mix and mingle with everybody else that they've known and really develop that culture that you really, really need with any company, whether it's remote or brick and mortar. I think that's really important. People look forward to going to these retreats. We have, I'd say 95% people attend out of our firm, which that's a pretty significant amount. And the ones that can't, they're just bummed. There's usually a super good reason why they're not going, because we make it enjoyable for them to go, something to look forward to and hang out with their friends that they've been meeting with over Zoom for the last, 6 months or so. And we've all experienced this. It's amazing when you meet people and you've seen eye contact and you know them and you meet with them all the time. It's not a big deal. It's like you've known them forever, right? And you've never met them in person. The only difference is you don't know how tall they are.
That's exactly right.
You're 7 foot.
Oh, that's funny. Hadn't thought of that one.
We actually did our first team retreat 2.5 years in October, and we had that exact experience that you talked about, right? We did some training, we brought in a speaker, and then we spent about half the time just doing fun things. We did Top Golf, we did Universal Studios, paid for everybody just to go hang out and have some fun. And we got really, really positive feedback on that event. What's really interesting is we do have a couple of employees who kind of sit on the fringes because of their jobs. They're typically part-time employees and they've got a very, very specific role that nobody else does. And I keep hearing from them that, hey, we're a little disconnected. We feel a little disconnected from the rest of the organization because we sit out here by ourselves. What do you do in that situation? I know what we've been trying to do, and I'm not sure we're 100% successful yet, but what's your advice on that type of scenario?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I'm trying to think of different roles within our organization that maybe kind of being on the fringe. We treat everybody very, very similar. We purposely do that. And I could think of a few folks that would be in that thing is that during the retreat, maybe they're doing the speech, or maybe I'm getting them more involved than what I would have to get involved with somebody that's normally meeting with everybody. So I guess I would say in that regard, just kind of think, how can I get that person in front of everybody so that they're more noticeable? And it may be tough for them because they may not be that person that wants to be out on the front stage. And so you've got to kind of figure that out, make them a team leader at the retreat. It could be something as simple as, hey, I want you to make sure you're picking up the tab for everybody, at your table, I'll cover the cost, whatever it is. But I would do things to purposely put them in the front row. I'd be curious to see what you've done so far. I'm sure that you probably thought of that, I would think. What have you done outside of that?
Honestly, some of this has come up fairly recently. One of the things we do as a team is we've got a once a week all hands meeting. I told my director that runs it, I'm like, look, if you get some business done, great. It shouldn't become a status call. It's an opportunity, maybe relate some key information to the team. Honestly, make it fun, let them chat. Yeah. It's a real challenge because you do have those employees and you do have those departments that are small and somewhat sometimes isolated. And the bigger your organization, sometimes the more isolated they could become, right? It's really a matter of trying to keep them connected to the rest of the organization where they don't feel like they're out on an island by themselves.
And to kind of think back through it and just kind of jogging my memory a little bit on that is that you sparked an interest where like our tax team, 4 or 5 individuals out of the 70 person organization, right? So we're tax, we obviously do tax for clients that we're doing work for, right? Well, the leader of that team could easily have been isolated just like you're talking about. But what I did for that is I made that person, he's the tax director, he runs our leadership meeting. So he's the one that actually runs it. Is he the best person to run it? Probably not. There's probably other people that have better skills to run a meeting than what he might have. But I'll tell you that he's done a very good job. He's in front of everybody. He's talking the talk. He feels very, very connected. Whereas I think in the circumstance, if I would have had somebody else do it, I could easily see that, hey, he might not show up every once in a while because we're talking CFO stuff. We're not talking tax stuff, that type of thing. I purposely made him in charge of that just for that reason. And thinking back, I don't know if that was my thought process or what, but that's definitely worked for us, is putting them into that lead role.
Pivoting a little bit to this hybrid model, when you guys put your organizations together, tell us a little bit about the culture clash and how you guys have been dealing with the after effects of that and what that looks like today or what you think it might look like tomorrow. I have a client in mind, a direct-to-consumer retail company. They just moved out of a building they've been in for 20 years into 2 different offices, which is funny because they're the company that's absolutely people must be in their office working inside the company type
Yep.
thing. Yet they have this little dichotomy right here where their operation is split. I think it could be a teaching opportunity for them to say, you know what, we're not really all in the office together. We are
Mhm.
split. How do I keep my company from looking like we're split? How did that manifest itself for you
Yeah,
guys?
it was a great question because we went in and we knew that we could be very successful as a fully remote distributed team. No issues there at all. We were humming along, solid culture and everything. And then we joined a firm that was primarily butts in the seats type of firm. They did over the period of probably a year and a half, 2 years before that, experiment with people working outside the office. And that was actually becoming more and more prevalent where they had people working 2 days out and 3 days in and kind of that type of back and forth. Not a ton of people that were 100% out, but it was usually kind of a kind of a mixed bag there. And so they were experimenting with that and working that, and their culture super strong as well. So it wasn't like our culture was really great and theirs was bad, or ours was bad and theirs was great, or anything like that. But the idea was, how are we going to bring these two cultures together so that it made it even better? If it's equal, I don't think that's a win. I think it's got to be better than what it was before. It was tough. We're in our first year, actually wrapped up our first year, going into our second year here, and we're still working out the bugs on it. It's not a perfect culture mix. There's a lot of things that have to be worked out. A lot of them are just simply the details. How do we track time versus how do they track time? Our culture is, hey, get the job done. You can work 50 hours in 4 days. And if you want to take Friday off, no big deal. It doesn't go get your PTO. Whereas theirs is like, well, it's butts in the seats. So if you take more than 4 hours, you have to take PTO on it. I'm not saying that's stupid. That's just their policy versus our policy. It's stupid that would be a barrier, but you've got to figure out all of those little bitty barriers so that people are on the same footing. With our team, we gave a $2,500 education stipend every year. They'd get it right on their Divvy card. We would do the same thing with a tech stipend so they can get their, furniture and computers and upgrades and all that kind of stuff every year. Anders team does not do that. They provide that stuff for them. When you're in an environment where it's remote, that's a lot of admin work. If you're going to provide and ship and all that kind of stuff around, why not give those folks the autonomy to make those decisions themselves within reason? Give them a card in order for them to do that. And so, even that small thing can cause friction between people because then they feel like, oh, the remote team is getting something I'm not getting, that type of thing, or, vice versa. And it could be like the Christmas party. We're going to have a Christmas party in St. Louis, but we're not going to fly everybody in for that. Only the people in St. Louis are going to have. We can't have everybody doing their Christmas party. So different things like that have got to be, ironed out. How can we make it so that we don't, make one team feel like they're isolated, out here, redheaded stepchild versus this team here is just the perfect, the perfect location type of thing. There's a lot of little bitty things that you got to work out. You got to keep in mind when you're going through it. And you just have to make sure that if you're in the brick and mortar, you don't discount what it's going to take to run a fully remote team and run it successfully. Because if you start discounting it or think that I'm just going to convert them and they're all going to fall into the same policy, it's going to be a struggle. I'm not saying it can't work, but it's going to be a super big struggle going through it. Just as simple as the time tracking thing I mentioned before. Like, hey, if I don't come in Friday, but I get all my work done, I don't think anybody really cares, because I got my work done. I got everything I was supposed to get done. I was productive. But if you're in a brick and mortar where you actually see somebody not coming in, then it becomes like, oh no, what's going on issue. Even though they might have worked, a bunch of hours beforehand, people don't know that. That transparency's got to be, like I said, the trust factor's got to be there. And you've got to be able to understand the pros and cons of both and kind of develop policies that maybe won't work for the remote team and won't work for the brick and mortar. So maybe there's two separate policies. But you've got to actually address the issues, though, I guess. And we didn't address the issues initially because we didn't know what the issues were, as we're flying it out on the runway, which is probably not the best thing to do. But again, being such a new concept, you got to do it. You just got to take that step and do it, but be cognizant of both sides, and what works for one may not work for the other.
A couple of things I was just kind of writing down here, little thoughts and things, and it kind of goes back to some of the previous conversation, but there's always been tension when people move from one cultural norm to the next. It doesn't really matter the context of that. We look through the course of history, and as people groups have moved from one cultural norm to the next, or there's been joining of cultures together, whatever it is, where we're looking now is, I think there are those people who, for COVID, forced them to sort of build the plane in the air. We're taking off down the runway. And there was little time, little to no expertise. They were vetting systems as they were jumping on them. Like you, we had gone virtual ahead of COVID and had the time and the space to really articulate and think through some of those things. So we were already fully acclimated to Zoom, and we were using Zoom on our everyday. So we didn't miss anything. We didn't miss a beat because that really provided us the opportunity to just do what we were already doing. But that being said, now when we look on the back end of that, and we're looking at two things. Number one, the realization and the recognition that what hasn't happened is we now have several years of workers who have come into the working environment who never worked in an in-person environment. Zero understanding of the cultural implications of that, the time management implications of that, the appropriateness of interaction between teams and between superior and subordinate roles in a company. Absolutely no context to that. And so in some cases, you see where there is tension, that tension often arises from a fact that these young people that have come into work just don't have the understanding about what that work environment is. And then lastly, when you think about that, I think when we're all sitting here and we're looking at the virtual environment, we're really having to reassess our onboarding and our training components. People are at different stages of their journey in their ability to work remotely. Some are more seasoned. Maybe they've already gone through some element of that, or they're a little bit more positioned to work independently well. Others don't have that learning style. By throwing everyone into the pool at the same time, that may not be the most efficient. You're going to have to really take a step back and evaluate, are we demonstrating what the proper behavior looks like, what the outputs look like, and then measuring effectively against those. Otherwise, you can keep hiring and keep letting people go because you're not going to get the mix right.
I 100% agree. I mean, to the point where the training is so important. I mean, some of the training has to be, when I say in person, I don't mean necessarily physically in person, but it has to be through like a conference here where we're actually going through or walking things through, screen sharing, all that kind of stuff. Some of the training can be, hey, here are the 5 books I want you to read about, and others can be video. It's a great time to create a 18 video module on every part of your company that you want somebody to know about, have them go through it, and then talk to them about it. The message is the same over and over and again, and it makes it really, really great. But one thing I would say is that with the training part, we actually have individuals that they don't know anything about accounting at all. You know, they couldn't tell you what a debit or credit was, nothing about tax, but their job is to really kind of help people out with everything from people skills to you name it. We've invested a good portion of our money into that. We got 2 individuals, they're full-time people, and that's their main job. They're meeting with people all the time saying, hey, you know, hey, what's going on? What's going right? What's going wrong? Hey, you know, Tim said this. I'm not sure how to really communicate well with him. Is he sarcastic? Does he really mean that? Or, you know, all those different things that you're talking about that you would figure out in a brick and mortar place that you really don't know because you only have a few minutes with them online. That was a huge asset, a huge win when we implemented that about 6 years ago for our team, just to coach people on how to communicate back and forth with not only their clients, but with the people on their team. With their clients, it was the same way. You know, hey, such and such really, it feels like I'm wasting his time, I think, on the calls. And it's like, well, what kind of personality is he? Does he want to get right in and get things done? Or does he want to chit chat for a little bit before he gets into it? Because I'm telling you, if it was me talking to him, I want to chit chat a little bit before I get into the nitty gritty of things. I don't want to just jump right in. But for him, maybe he does want to jump right in. That coach can kind of help those individuals and really teach them how to communicate and be a better manager, better leader, better worker bee, you know, whatever that might be. That was huge, investing in those people for the soft skill training.
That's a really interesting concept. Trying to write that down as you were speaking, because that's a really, really good idea. Are they just on your team? Are they just coaches, or what are their specific roles?
Yeah, so they lead our team meeting. So not our leadership meeting, but our team meeting. So they're the person that's out front. They don't do the interviewing. They can be part of the interviewing, but they're definitely part of the onboarding. They get to know the people right away. They're part of the reviews. They're sitting in on the reviews. They're the people ops person. And then they're assigned to coaching, to where they coach all of our CFOs. You know, they've got an hour a month that they're on a call with each of the CFOs, you know, just going through, hey, how's things going? What's going right? What's going wrong? You know, we've got another one coach that's assigned to all of our accounting team. So not the CFOs, but the accounting teams. That's what their job is. What's going right, what's going wrong. And then they communicate back and forth. So they're kind of like the liaison between the two teams. Kristen's, really doing, what does she mean by this? She's on me all the time about it. And then they'll give them ideas how to address those situations. They've got the set meetings, but they're on call anytime throughout that process. They meet directly on a weekly basis with all the directors. They have one-on-ones with the directors. You think that, we're all great, we get along real well. Well, that's not the case. It's no different than a family. I love my brother, but it doesn't mean I get along with him every day. They're the kind of the referee.
Great concept. Wow. Great concept.
Yeah, definitely a game changer.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we were referring to earlier about, really having to rethink what a team looks like in those roles. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Jody, if they want to reach out? I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to listen to this with a lot of different kind of questions. And I know it's always helpful to reach out.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to hop on a call and talk about anything from remote work, what works, doesn't work, doesn't make any difference. They can reach out to me either through email at jody@summitcpa.net, or just hop on our website. We've got different functions there where they can reach out and schedule a meeting, through that way too. SUMMITCPA.net. We couldn't afford the .com, so we decided to go to the .net. So.
I get it. Well, this has been a particularly rich session. It's absorbing all the oxygen in the room, and you really have solved for a lot of the challenges that people are bringing up about their impossibilities. So I think this is going to be a very popular episode. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to really share it with us, number one, and then to let me ask these questions for a friend. We're all appreciative. We're all appreciative of that.
By friend, he meant me, myself, and I.
Yeah. I'm asking these for Eric. Eric needs help. So there you go.
Oh, yeah, trust me, Eric needs help.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on today. And thank you for our listeners. This has been another episode of the Digital Velocity Podcast. This is your co-host, Tim Curtis.
And I'm Eric Martinez. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about how Blue Tangerine and Cohere One can help you generate more sales for your business, visit bluetangerine.com and cohere1.com. If you have enjoyed our show today, please tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the digitalvelocitypodcast.com website to send us your questions and topic suggestions. Be sure to join us again on the Digital Velocity Podcast.